Welcome. What we will do in this demonstration is to again look at how we can draw a group of trees in interesting shapes and have a nice drawing just with a group of trees in a distance. So in few demonstrations we have seen how we can draw in a group of trees like this receding in a distance seen from the top. And in another demonstration, I showed how we can, have a drawing like this, where we have a group of trees and then some other elements next to it. So these are different ways in which you can actually, just draw this group of trees using these parallel lines and create a nice, pleasing landscape. And what I will do in this demonstration is to build on it. So I'll show you some other ways in which you can, draw these simple trees and create a nice, pleasing landscape. And what we will do in this demonstration is to essentially see how we can draw those trees far out in the distance. Essentially, so in a sense, we will have a group of trees far out in the distance, and it will create a nice wooded kind of scene. So essentially, again, start by drawing down my line, this distant line. And what we are going to do is to essentially draw smaller trees far out in the distance in a big cluster. So in other demonstrations, we have essentially, drawn different kind of planes and drawn, a few tree here, a few tree there in the distance, just to, give it a nice backdrop. But what we will do here in this demonstration is just simply focus on these trees out in the distance, essentially. And that's what we will do. And then you will see how a nice pleasing landscape can be drawn just, using those simple elements. So I start by, laying down my first tree trunk. And what I do next is to essentially, define a kind of foliage for this tree. So as you can see, the trees are only far out in the distance. So we will not really have any tree up close. So this is going to be a different kind of composition where you will have just trees far out in the distance. And then you will see how it's essentially, you can put trees at different distance from the viewer and create a nice kind of, different pleasing landscape. So essentially, in this, in all this demonstration, my aim is to show you different ways in which you can kind of create interesting landscapes, right? So I've showed you how you can have the trees looking down from top, how you can have trees looking down from the ground level, and you can create the distance by having trees up close and receding into the distance. So there are different ways I'm showing in which you can create a nice landscape. And what we will see over here is to just have trees far out in the distance. So that is also kind of a nice composition you can have that we will see in this demonstration. So essentially, I start by putting down my one tree, and then I will essentially draw something similar trees that are far out in the distance where that are closest to the viewer. So here the trees are not really close, but essentially at least they have their full foliage visible. So what you do when you're drawing a group of trees is to always start by drawing the trees with the full foliage visible, because these are trees that will hide other foliage of trees behind them. So what I will do is essentially create some of these trees and then start to draw some trees that are behind them, just to create a nice pleasing landscape, have a group of them together. So essentially I start by simply putting one tree over here, one tree there, and then I can have one tree over here as well. So as you can see, what we're doing in this landscape is to not really have any tree closer to the viewer. So if I have tree closer to the viewer, then I will start from here somewhere like this. So in other demonstration we saw how I had a big tree in front and then others behind it. But what I'm doing in this demonstration is to simply have a group of trees far out in the distance, and that also is very is a pleasing drawing, because essentially the viewers can see trees far out in the distance and they can kind of move towards it. So that's what I'm doing over here. I essentially start by laying down some of my trees right here, and then I start to kind of put some other trees behind these trees in the front. So I have one tree a little bit even further out, and this will have some part of its foliage hidden by this tree, and that's what I do over here. So again, these are very simple landscape, but very, very interesting, very pleasing to do, because all you're using is the simple parallel line that we have seen in a lot of demonstrations to draw the tree foliage. And what you're doing is essentially, laying them in a manner that suggests their, distance, that suggests, the kind of, that has a nice visual appeal. So that's what we're doing essentially. So as you can see, here, just by having this tree a bit hidden, that gives a nice sense of distance and has a nice visual appeal. So, you just continue in this manner. And this is a different, simple composition that you can do anytime. So just start by putting down these trees and then essentially add a bit more in between, just to kind of, have a nice group of them together over there. So I just put on one over here. And what you can even do is to just have a trunk over here further out. So over here, you can just simply kind of put down the trunk. And as we have seen again, when you have a very small trunk like this, what you do is to just simply have a jagged darkness in one edge. So essentially, when you draw the outline of a trunk, if the trunk is very small, you don't really have space to create a bark texture. So just to give it a nice feel of roundness, what you do is you create this outline, and then you create this kind of jagged darkness over here, something like this. So just by adding this jagged darkness, which you have seen in a lot of other tutorials, you can create a sense of volume and also give a bit of hint for the bark. So this is a very simple, very effective technique that we have seen in a lot of demonstrations, and that's what we are using over here, because all our trunks are far out in the distance. So essentially I draw some trunks, and in some places I just simply even leave that a bit indication of a trunk far out in the distance. So there we have it, something like this. And over here, for example, I can just draw a trunk over here, and always remember to make it tapered, something like this. And if you want, you can even add a bit of very, very faint hint of foliage at the bottom. So this is a very simple composition, a very nice drawing that you can draw, very effective drawing. And again, I will go ahead and add one more trunk over here, and then again have a bit of foliage, something like this over here. So again, the key is to always draw the tree up front, so this and this, and then what you do is just to add trees in between. And this is something that you just play with, essentially, right? So you don't really have to do a hard composition. So over here, I just added one more tree over here, and then similarly, I can add one more small tree over here. So essentially, I'm just playing with this drawing, essentially. So I just add a bit over here, a bit over there, and then soon, so if you want, you can make it a bit more dense in the center and lighter on the edges, or you can just have it, you have it uniformly distributed like we have over here. But essentially, what this composition is about is a group of trees in the distance, a kind of wooded trees in the distance, and we just essentially draw a few of the big ones in the front, and then we simply add other foliage. And again, the technique for adding foliage is using this parallel line that we have seen in other demonstrations. So this is a very a nice, a very effective way to essentially draw simple compositions in a small time. So again, you lay down that trunk like this, add a jagged darkener just to give the trunk a bit of form, and then you just use these parallel lines again over here. And what you do is to kind of then add a second layer over here just to add in a bit more texture to the foliage. And we have seen this in other demonstrations as to how you can add in different layers of parallel lines to bring out a kind of feel for the volume of the foliage. So there we have it, essentially. So I just lay down one layer of parallel lines and then added another layer over it, and then by doing that you can have a nice feel of foliage for that tree. So there we have it. So this is how quickly you can put down. As you can see, as I'm putting down these different trees and putting one behind the other, you're getting a nice sense of a nice composition. So essentially it's a very simple composition, but I really like doing it because this is something you can easily do anytime, and there's really no limit, in a sense that you can have them organized in different manners. You can have them a bit closer up if you want, or you can have them dense in one area and then becoming thinner at the edges. So there are many variations on this composition. So if you are just short on any ideas, always just have a small drawing like this and start by putting down this small few trees in the front, and then just add bit at the back. So this is a great way to essentially just come up with some nice drawing whenever you have some time. And over here so you just keep adding so you just keep adding more trees if you like, and at some point you can feel that there's enough of density of the wood of the trees, or if you want you can even add more. So for example, if I want, I can just have it kind of tapered line over here. So at the very back, this tapered line indicates even more trees over there. So you can even just add those tapered lines at the very back to indicate even more trees. So this is real fun, So over here, for example, I can again add a bit of, and in the distance you can just add a bit of tapered line like this to indicate a tree over here. So and then that way you can give it nice feel of dense woods in the distance. So there we have it. So I just added even more. So just by adding a bit more lines now at the very distance, tapered line, you're giving a nice feel of a dense wood in the distance. So this is this is a very simple but very pleasing drawing that I like to do anytime I'm sitting and I have some time. And the whole concept is very simple. You just need to kind of draw the outline of a trunk, and just kind of draw a bit of outline of the foliage, and then use these parallel lines that we have seen in a lot of demonstrations to draw the foliage, and then essentially draw the layers of trees, essentially hide some behind each other, and then draw a little bit of trunks at the bottom just to give it a nice feel of dense wooded area. So over here I'm making a bit more. So you can see this is a very simple and very even the drawing is quite small. So this is something that you can actually do with a very small piece of paper, even if you have it. So I normally recommend that you carry a small sketch pad with you, and this is something that you can do in any sketch pad. But yeah, if you even have a small piece of paper, you can always just take out your pen and enjoy putting this together. So here again I just added one more tree over here, and as you can see what I'm doing is to essentially kind of give it a taper. So essentially I always like to kind of end with the small trees in the distance. So the tree something it goes like this. So this shape is kind of a bit organic, I like, and I always like to kind of end with those trees in the at the back that are kind of tapering. So I'll add one more something like this over here. So there we have it. So now you have a nice feel of a distant wooded area, something like this. And what we did is to simply use the same parallel line stroke to create the foliage of the trees, but we place them in a manner that creates a sense of distance over there. And there we have it. So now at this point, if I want, even I can add more trees, right? So for example, over here, and like we have seen in the demonstration that if the trees are a bit up close, then you can draw the foliage of the tree far out at the bottom. So for example, there are two options. If you have a tree and the foliage is a bit bigger or something like this, and there's a tree over here, if you still have space, then you can show a bit of foliage, something like this. So that establishes the kind of relative order. But if you don't really have space and you have one tree over here, and if you have some other tree over here, for example, already over here, then for the tree further out in the distance, you don't really have to, you have much less space over here. So if you don't really have space, then you can just simply show a bit of trunk, so our mind interprets that as a kind of tree far out in the distance. And that's what we are doing. So over here, I'll just add a bit of tapered darkness over there. So you can see just by adding a bit of tapered line over there, that our mind is interpreting that as more trees further out in the distance, and that's creating even more sense of wooded areas. So you can always do that. So just add a bit more lines, and then you can indicate a bit more hint of trees in the distance, and that creates a nice sense of wooded area. So what I will do is I will add a bit more lines over here. So again, remember to keep them tapered, something like this, a small tapered line. This gives a nice sense of a tree trunk in the distance, and serves to indicate a bit more wooded area of this lot. So there you have it. So very quickly, in just around 10 minutes, you can have a small drawing like this done anytime. And what you can do in the end is to kind of just make the ground a bit more formed. So essentially, we have seen that you need to always ground the trunks, and then also have some kind of ground definition to make the drawing a bit more interesting, right? So what I will do is to ground the trunk. What we do is to use these kind of lines, these kind of grass strokes to essentially ground the trunk. So that's what we will use over here. And since these trees are far out in the distance, I literally will use very small grass strokes, something like this, almost like a dot or a very small kind of marks. So these kind of grass strokes will serve to ground the trunk. And again, what we have seen in the demonstration is to ground the trunk, you just need to create a bit of darkness at their base. So that is how we ground a trunk. So for example, this trunk is not grounded, and what I do is I simply add a bit of dots here, a bit of dot there, and there you have it now. So this trunk is grounded. So this is how you do it, right? So again, if you have a trunk like this, and just create a jagged darkness just to bring out its volume. So if you have a trunk like this, just create a bit of darkness, and don't create it very flat straight, but create a bit a shape, something like this. So that creates more interest compared to just a flat in darkness. So there we have it, something like this. And that's what I just did over here to ground that trunk, and I will just continue to doing the same to ground other trunk. There we have it, a bit of dot here, a bit of dot there, and it starts to ground the trunk. So there we have it. And the very far out in the distance, what you can do is just add a bit of dot over there and over here. So this dots again serves to indicate some kind of ground texture as well, and serves to ground the trunk. So again, the far out in the distance, we don't really have space over here to draw the background foliage that we have drawn in other demonstrations. So it all depends on how much space and the relative size of different elements. So the trees are up close, then you would have more space over here, and then you would be able to draw a mountain or a distant tree line or other elements that we have drawn in other demonstrations. But because in this composition, essentially the trees are much further out in the distance, we don't really have much space in this distant view. So essentially what I do is I simply just put dots over there just to ground the trunk, and give it a more interest feel to the ground. So there we have it. So for this distant area, what I'm using is just using a dot, something like this, to ground the trunk, and also create some kind of ground cover suggestion over there. And again, I'll just do the same for over here as well. So again, so this is a very simple composition. I really like this because this can be done very quickly, and once you get hang of drawing these trees, you can literally combine them in many different ways. So we have seen in other demonstrations that you can have trees up close, receding out into the distance, that creates a nice sense of distance and a path that the viewer can follow. So we have done that in other demonstrations, and then we can also add other elements like an outcrop I did, and you can have backdrop of mountains or what have you. So there are a lot of different possibilities, and what I wanted to show in this demonstration is how quickly you can just draw trees at a distance. So essentially you don't really need to have even a tree up close, just the trees in the distance is a great simple composition that can be done anytime, and it is very effective. So you can see that your mind is immediately taken to the far out in the distance over there. And what you can do at this point is, if you want, you can add a bit more grass, and you can even add a bit of surface irregularities that that we saw in other demonstrations. So essentially, what you can do is just simply draw a line like this, and a line like this, and this kind of defines the kind of bit of imperfections in the ground. So you can have a plain grassy ground. So essentially there are two possibilities, essentially when you're doing the ground is you can just have a ground that you cover with grass, but you don't really bring out any imperfections. So in that sense, the ground is more like a conduit for our eyes to travel to the other elements. Or in other demonstrations we have seen that you can also make a bit of imperfections on the ground and even highlight the ground as such. So that's what we have done. So essentially to create some kind of imperfections on the ground, what you do is start by laying down these lines, simple lines, something like this, and then essentially just create a bit of highlight for these lines and then just draw something like this, so essentially again you just lay down like this. Do not lay a flat line, but kind of a bit of curvy line like this, and then you just add a bit of darkness. So what happens when you add this darkness is that it creates a bit of depth to that spot. So now this is seen as a kind of an area that is imperfection, and this darkness serves to reinforce it. And then you can have these parallel lines drawn in this manner. So you essentially kind of want to draw the parallel lines like this, and then what this serves to reinforce also is the notion of this as an imperfection. So essentially just the line doesn't give it that kind of form, but once you darken this a bit over here and then you add a bit of line like this, that serves to kind of bring out the form for that imperfection a bit more. So we saw in detail how to do this in other demonstrations, but yeah, essentially so you draw a line like this, add some kind of darkness to give it more weight, and then draw these lines in this manner. So essentially follow the lines in this manner. So don't draw anything in a rectangular shape, but in perspective always draw something like this in this kind of shape, right? So that's what we are doing, just adding a bit of lines over here. And again, this is an imperfection, so adding a bit of line over there. Again, just highlight it and highlight it over here and just add a bit of line. So as you can see, just when you add a bit of line, now this is giving a bit more shape, a bit more form to this imperfection, something like that, right? And I will do something similar for this as well. Just add, and do not darken it uniformly. So if you have a line like this, do not darken it uniformly. Just add a bit of darkness here, a bit of darkness there, because this kind of jagged darkness, this darkness serves to give it a bit more form or a bit more definition to that line. So this is no longer a line, but now we can feel that this kind of darkness indicates that there are kind of some kind of texture or some kind of form to this. And then when you add this line further, that brings out its form further. So now this feels like a surface imperfection, not just a line. So that's what we have done. So I will just add a bit of jaggedness over here, add a bit of jaggedness over here, and then I add this line. So now you can see, now you can feel that this is kind of imperfection on the surface. So that's what I will do with this as well over here. And then finally what you can do is just simply add a bit of grass and a bit of other kind of foliage at these imperfection points. So in the demonstration we saw that you can use a line like this, something like this. So this this kind of organic shapes, a loop like this. So these are very nice strokes that you can use in pen and ink to give some hint of foliage, a plant, a shrubbery, a tree, not a tree, but a kind of bush or what have you. So this is a great sort of strokes. So again, a line like this with some kind of a flower at the top, or even just kind of loops or some kind of lines. So when you combine them together like this, you start to get a nice sense of a bit of foliage over there. And that's what we have seen in the demonstration, how you can add those things to these kind of imperfection points to bring out something, make the ground more interesting. So that's what I will do. I'll go ahead and just add a bit of line. So as you can see, I'm just adding a bit of dot here. Even yeah, you can just even use a dot, but simple loop, and there you have it, right? And always also keep them tapered, right? So your foliage should also be tapered just like the ground. And there we have it, nice, interesting, feel to that, ground imperfection. I do the same over here. So again, just add a bit of, something like this, a line with a flower, a loop, something like this, right? So just keep your hand moving. The most important thing is to just let your, mind wander and just, let your hand moving, and soon, you will have a nice feel of foliage in that spot, and that creates more interest. So essentially you can have a bare kind of an imperfection like this, but just adding something over here, even a small line, just add a bit of, not a stiff straight line, but kind of a bit angle line, something like this. And now this makes it more interesting. So now we can see that there's something over there, and this somehow that just looks nice. So let's do that to all this this imperfection points you define over here. So something like this. And then once you have that, you can even create a bit of grass cover on these other white areas. So you don't have to leave this wide, because again if you're drawing a snow scene, that's fine. But again otherwise just even add a bit of just dots, a bit of grass serves to enforce the notion of some kind of ground cover in a grass or what have you. So you can add more imperfections, or you can have a bit of imperfections over here, over there, and then just cover the other remaining ground with a bit of grass stroke, something like this that we have seen at the demonstration, very small grass stroke. And again, I'll just add a bit of foliage to this imperfection over here, and then I'll just cover the rest of the ground with a simple grass stroke, just to indicate some kind of ground cover. So again, you don't really want to have these imperfections too much because they will overwhelm your drawing. So you always have to have a kind of balance in your drawing. So you want this to be a nice center of interest, where the viewers can see the imperfections and then they can move on to that tree. But if we create too much imperfections, then what will happen is that it will start to kind of take the highlight and kind of create too much of a dark spot over here. So what I'm doing is I'm adding enough imperfections like these lines over here to make the ground interesting, but I'm not doing too much to make it a bit darker and then taking the kind of making it just the main focal point. So I want to have a nice balance of dark and white. So now we have a bit of dark over here in that tree, so we want to leave the ground a bit white. So which is why I added a bit of these imperfections, but still I've left these whites over here. So that is serving a nice transition, right? So this is making our imperfections stand out, but still giving us a bit of white in the center, so that the viewer can then transition to the trees in the distance. So this is what you should always try, is to kind of have a bit of white and dark balance in your drawing, so that the things are not kind of merging into each other. So I did that for the foliage as well. So once you have different foliage, I try to leave a layer of so for example here there's a bit of white over here, right? So essentially the front foliage is lighter and then the back foliage over here is darker, so that creates a bit of transition. So that kind of transition always is very useful, is very effective, because then the viewers can make the distinction between different elements. So in this case our these imperfections, they stand out nicely in the front, and then this white spot over here. So I didn't add any imperfections over here because that would create a bit more darkness, and since our tree foliage is already dark, I wanted to leave a bit of white. So now you can see that we have a nice transition to our foliage from the ground. So this is something you should try to strive for in your drawing. And I'll add a bit of grass over here just to kind of have some kind of ground cover. And finally, actually, I can even add a bit of grass over here in this corner as well. So there you have it. This is a very simple drawing, very effective drawing. I really like doing this thing. And what you can do is, you can play on the variation of this theme, which is that you can have a bunch of these trees in the distance, right? So you can make them closer, have them grouped together, and on this side, then you can have a small mountain or an outcrop, and any other element that we have seen in other demonstrations, right? So this is a very effective way to create a simple drawing anytime, quickly in under 15-20 minutes, and really, it really looks pleasing once you're done with it. It's a simple drawing like this, and okay, you can enjoy doing it anytime. And so there we have it, just a very simple effective drawing that you can do in under 20 minutes and enjoy doing anytime. Thanks, take care, bye bye.